Okay, while the slides are uploaded, if I just introduce myself. I hope people have got the technology if you need the interpretation. My name is Richard Lee. I live in London, in the UK, and I coordinate a community-based network called Just Space. I'm a paid worker, part-time for Just Space, and I'm also a part-time activist. But I realize from this morning that these terms will need explanation. In London, we also have what I think you call social activists, if I understood right, where people come to provide support for a neighborhood, but they are external. But most of the activists in London are active in their own neighborhoods, and I'm in that category. So I'm an activist where I live. You might prefer to see me as an active citizen if you have problems with this term of activist, but this is my description. What I'd like to give a presentation about is the question of the involvement of citizens. A lot has been said so far about the involvement of NGOs. Not so much about the citizens as collaboration, participation at the highest level in terms of strategic policy development and decision making. And the organization that I work for is an example of how it is possible to involve citizens in the preparation of strategies, all the way through to the decision-making process. It is not at all impossible or unviable. Actually, it's quite straightforward. So the first slide is a description of Just Space. We have NGOs amongst our membership. We have universities amongst our membership. But the key requirement is that the NGOs and the universities are supporting the agenda of the citizens. And of course, there are NGOs and universities that are happy to orientate themselves in this way. But it is the principle of our network that in order for it to be citizen-led or community-led, then organizations like NGOs and universities have to respect that and want to provide socially useful work in support of the citizens. Just Space's origins, in fact, were a situation in London in terms of spatial development plans where a very small number of NGOs only were able to participate in terms of the development plans. And questions were raised about co-option of the NGOs. Questions were raised about their representativeness and about who they were accountable to. So it was felt to be very important that actually there was a network in place that had as its main purpose to be community or citizen-led, working with the NGOs, working with universities, but citizen-led. As you can see from the description on this slide, the types of groups from the community that make up Just Space are a number of tenants groups and residents groups, a number of environmental groups. So, for example, it is common in London that where you have a green space, a park, you will have a Friends of the Park group. This is a voluntary activity on behalf of people living near the park or users of the park who want to help to sustain the park. And they form themselves into a group. This is just one example of environmental group. We also, in London, have a lot of activity from equality groups, whether this is in terms of youth groups, older people's groups, disability groups, a number of cultural or ethnicity-based groups, which is a very strong component of our work in London. You'll see NGOs is there, and I don't want you to gain the impression that we don't work and include NGOs. They are absolutely an important part of our work. But as you can see from this slide, the dominating force is the citizens groups within the society. And our purpose is really about mutual support. This is really what we're about. Of course, there are many examples in London too, where the municipality or the district government will have a number of involvement processes, whether it is workshops or exhibitions or surveys and so on. This is quite common. But we feel that there has to be an independent community network as well as the collaboration, maybe co-production with the local authority. For that really to be effective, there has to be a space in which the community level can actually come together, can think out its own strategies, can think out who will represent the community in the panels or working groups or whatever that the municipality might choose to set up. To us, it's fundamental to the success of a participation process that there exists an independent community network. And finally, you might be wondering, where do we work? London's a very big city. Our starting point is citywide. And I'll explain that how that came about in a minute. But our starting point is citywide activity in terms of the spatial development plan for London. But we also do work at a district level, the local government level, and we also do work at the more micro neighbourhood level. And we like to say that we are connecting the local and the strategic, that this is a key part of our activity. And we think that those of you this morning who raised the problem of citizens feeling alienated by strategy and the difficulty of involving the citizen when it comes to strategic development, we think it's very important to make strong connections between the local and the strategic to overcome that alienation. So why the involvement London-wide across the whole of the city? As you can see from this slide, the Mayor of London has a number of strategic responsibilities, and these strategic roles of the Mayor of London come together in what's called the London Plan, which is the spatial development strategy for London. And this is a 20-year plan. It has to be implemented through the district councils. So obviously that level is extremely important. And we find in London that really every 2 years there are changes being made to the Mayor's plan. as a result of changes in maybe economic or environmental context, changes in government policy. These all require regular updates of the London Plan, and therefore a process for participation. And every time there's a new mayor, they like their own plan, of course. So they completely rewrite the London Plan, and then you have a much bigger participation process to deal with. One thing you might find interesting about the participation process within the planning system in England is that we have something called a public examination, which for the citizen is a very strong benefit of the system and a very strong attraction to participate. What this means is that after the various consultation mechanisms, whether from the Mayor of London or the same operates at a district council level, after the consultation and the participation mechanisms, after comments have been made or not made, then a planning inspector appointed by central government will come and carry out a public examination of the planning document before that document can be agreed. The style is a round table style. It's not a big plenary. It's very much a round table, generally about 25 places maximum. And there is debate and deliberation, and ultimately the planning inspector will produce a report and make recommendations as to whether the changes that have been proposed by the municipality should proceed or not, or whether there should be different changes as a result of the debate. We at a community level find that this is a very transparent process. It gives an important independent element, and we have had many poor experiences of consultation on strategies where there is no independent examination at the end of it, because we often find we are disappointed in terms of the changes that we want to see not being made. So we like this independent element that the English planning system gives. And as you can see from this slide, in 2010, which was the last time that there was a complete rewrite of the London Plan, there were 35 days of public examination. So this is a big process. And as you can imagine, for community groups to take part in such a process, there is a need for strong mutual support. There's also the need for the NGO sector and the university sector in particular to be providing some technical support to the community representatives. You'll see that the 2010 examination, 60 community groups or citizens groups took part, 60, took part over the 35 days. And you might be thinking, well, okay, is that normal? And what was it in the past before that? Well, actually, before Just Space came together to mobilize and provide this mutual support, there was an extremely low number of community groups taking part, probably three or four. And there were a similar low number of NGOs who were taking part. The process had been very dominated by the private sector, the developer interest, and by the public bodies. So previously, the round tables of 25 people, you would have had maybe 3 or 4 from the NGO and community sector, and the rest equally divided developer and public authorities. So strongly dominated by the developer and public bodies. As a result of our activity in 2010, we managed to achieve an average of 1/3 participation, which was our objective. So we were looking at somewhere between 8 and 12 community and NGO representatives at every session over 35 days. What kind of issues did we raise? One of the criticisms of the sole NGO involvement that had been the model before was that very often the NGOs were not able to raise fundamental issues to do with the future of London in terms of the citizens. Often there would be what we might describe as smaller issues being raised by the NGOs. And often we also found that the NGOs did not have the direct evidence from the neighbourhood level in order to be able to successfully make a change to the planning document, which has in the English system has a strong reliance on being evidence-based. So the types of issues that we knew from our own networking discussions that you see up here, none of these issues were being raised by the NGOs, except to some extent the final one in terms of environmental justice. There is a strong environmental NGO sector in London, and one has to credit some of those organisations are very strong in terms of their campaigning work and have a tradition of raising issues around the climate change issues. But the other issues just hadn't been raised at all. Issues in terms of the impact of regeneration on low-income communities, which in London has often meant the demolition of the housing of the low-income community, the demolition of the small shops and other services such as community buildings in order to make way for the future in terms of the economic growth. We found that this was not being put on the agenda. And we were determined to provide the evidence in terms of impact at a local neighbourhood level and ensure that there was a public debate around the displacement of low-income communities in London. So this was very important for us. Linked to that, the future of low-cost rented housing in London. We have a tradition in London of a lot of low-cost rented housing. Or subsidised, if you're used to that term, subsidised rented accommodation. This has been under great stress in the last 10 to 15 years by government policy. And again, a lot of the policy direction is to no longer build any low-cost rented housing. And that goes together with the regeneration policy of demolition of what exists at the moment, a policy then to not build any low-cost rented in the future. This was precarious for the large numbers in London who have a housing need in this area. So we were, again, very determined that this is put on the public agenda. And then thirdly, issues around the future of industrial land in London. Not uncommonly, there are questions around the changes in the economy as manufacturing industry declines. But what does that mean for the existing industrial areas of London? And we find from our experience on the ground that right now most of the industrial land in London is not vacant. It's not in a very poor condition. It's actually in a good economic situation in terms of the businesses, the small business units that are operating there. And again, this industrial land is under threat, mainly for residential development, and we wanted to ensure that the case was made. So these, the first three in particular, were key issues that we wanted to raise. I've mentioned before, I think, this slide, but just to reiterate the importance of work at different levels. And as I mentioned, the district councils also have examinations in public of their planning documents. And we do a lot of work at a district level, supporting citizen groups to take part in those examinations. And again, we find that the tradition, if you like, the back context is of very low levels of involvement over the previous 10, 15 years, very low levels. The examinations completely dominated by developers and public bodies, quite often zero citizen involvement, and that includes NGOs as well, zero NGO involvement. So we wanted to address this, and again we found that actually there's a great interest at a local level to take part in this. It's simply a question of communication about the importance of the strategic document, that it's important to be proactive in your work, not just to be involved in a developer's application coming forward in your neighbourhood, but actually get the policy right, and this will make it much easier for you to have a sustainable development in your area. And we found that as community members ourselves, we were the best placed people to actually have the discussion, to mobilise other community members in that district, because we had the language that was required. Whereas a local authority trying to encourage the mobilisation was extremely difficult for many factors. What other examples are there of how we engage with people? I've put up just 3 examples from last year. We have conferences that are London-wide and are quite large events, 80, 100 people. We have seminars which are quite like this, perhaps 20, 30, 40 in number. And to sustain the involvement, in recent years we've been setting up community planning networks, because it's very encouraging when you get 100 people at a conference, but the question is, well, how do you sustain that? How do you, and how is there a mechanism in place which will support those people to actually take part afterwards, whether it's at a district level or whether it's at a London-wide level? In your pack there's a longer transcript of which these slides are a shorter version, and you'll find there is some further information there, and I mention it now to give an example. One of the things that resulted from the conference we had around demolition and displacement was a lot of interest from community groups to produce their own plan. That groups were saying that as well as trying to influence the plan from their municipality, as well as trying to gain co-production, that they felt that their position would be much strengthened if they were seen to have produced their own vision, their own community plan, which they could then engage with their municipality in discussions on. And in some cases, this has been done in parts of London where the municipality had no resources of its own to produce a planning framework for a particular neighbourhood. And therefore the community was actually able to add value, if you want to put it that way, to the municipality's work by bringing in resources and producing something that the municipality did not have the resources to produce. You might be wondering, well, how did citizens produce their own community plan? And yes, the role of universities and planning students has been very useful. Just Space has agreements with one university in particular, with their planning school, whereby we're able to recruit volunteer planning students who appreciate the experience of hands-on work at a grassroots level and are ready to commit to helping neighbourhood groups to do research, to summarise technical documents, to assist with surveying, mapping and things like this. And this is very, very valuable. But the key thing is that the community themselves identify the research that they need. We've had a number of problems in the past where universities have done project work in a particular community, but it has been to the university's agenda or to the students' own course development. And the research hasn't been shared with the community and hasn't been particularly useful at a social level. So for Just Space to make an agreement with the School of Planning at the university to actually ensure that some of the work of the students was geared towards the research agenda of the community groups, this was very important for us. How does Just Space organise itself? We are a network. We have, over the years, since we were formed in 2007, we've had quite a lot of debate about how we should organise ourselves. There's always the pressure to become more organised, especially in order to attract funding, for example, or a perception that if you're better organised for the outside world, then actually you can gain more legitimacy. But on the other hand, it's important for many of the members to stay as, we call it horizontal, to stay as non-hierarchical as is possible, to ensure that there's easy access to our network for citizens groups across London. And we have worried that if we set up some kind of board or committee or whatever, that actually this may become rather an expert panel, and we don't want to go down that route. We actually want to ensure that citizens groups can feel that they can participate and come in and out of the network when they need the network. So we don't have a committee or executive or anything like that. We have open meetings, and we don't vote either. We actually think that voting is not a very appropriate model when it comes to community participation, because it can divide more often. If you lose the vote, how do you feel? If it was very important for you. And really we want to try and unify the voices of the community, because that's our strength. And we're very careful not to encourage a situation where you would have any rival groups or something like that, which we think a voting system encourages. And finally, I think, what is seen by our members as the benefits is that community groups, first of all, tend to join Just Space because they have a particular issue, whether it's a housing issue, an environmental issue, a transport issue, whatever. And they often say that as a result of coming to the network meetings, discussing with other interest groups, that it actually broadens their own understanding of how the planning system works, about the interconnections between all these issues, and that to be effective in terms of spatial development strategies, actually you need an understanding of the whole, and that if you only keep within your own area of specialism, actually it's very hard for you to participate at a more strategic level. So we often get that feedback. Of course, people say, well, by coming together we feel stronger. We felt we were a lonely voice sometimes, when we were trying to have our say with the public bodies. And by joining with many of us, we feel actually more notice is taken of us and we feel stronger. The question of experts and professional knowledge and experience, I think I must finally comment on this. I heard a lot this morning about experts, expert panels involving the involvement of experts as a participatory process. Who are the experts? Who are they representing? Who are they accountable to? I think these are legitimate questions to be asking, as well, of course, as who selects them. Many of the citizens groups who are part of our network, though they wouldn't call themselves experts, actually they could be classified as experts. Those who've been involved for over many years now and have taken part in these examinations in public and have debated across the table with the public bodies, with the developer, with technical support, actually become trained to be experts, inverted commas, if you like. They have to be effective, but they wouldn't want to call themselves as experts because at the end of the day they are active in their communities and on their issues, and they have a commitment to a broader participation than being an expert implies. But I have to say that for us to be successful, we are not putting down expertise, professional knowledge. The planning system is very complicated. It requires technical knowledge and support. And we have put a lot of effort to bring together the grassroots experience, the evidence of what's happening at a neighbourhood level, together with the professional knowledge and expertise that universities, for example, can assist with. And we have had feedback from various public bodies who agree that this is our strength, that we have successfully managed to combine the professional knowledge with the real-life grassroots experience. And I think that's it, but I'm very open to your questions.
To ja tylko chciałam zapytać na początek, na ile te działania, które zostały przeprowadzone w ramach procesu, o którym mówiłeś, zostały jakoś powtórzone, czy podobne procesy zadziały się na przykład w jakichś innych dokumentach takich bardziej sektorowych czy branżowych w Londynie i czy na przykład w jakichś innych miastach w ogóle próbowano też pracować w taki sposób? I czy coś ewentualnie o tym mógłbyś opowiedzieć? Bo my jeszcze dzisiaj będziemy mieli właśnie okazję porozmawiać już w trakcie warsztatów o takiej kolejnej strategii kultury i w ogóle wydaje się, że w Polsce jakoś te tematy kulturalne tak stosunkowo okazały się wdzięczne do zapoczątkowania podobnych procesów, no ale właśnie jestem ciekawa, czy jakieś inne rzeczy niezwiązane na przykład właśnie z przestrzenią, tylko jakieś dotyczące polityki społecznej chociażby, która jest takim bardzo drażliwym tematem, czy ktoś próbował pracować nad nimi w podobny sposób i jak to ewentualnie wyszło?
Okay, so in the London context, the spatial development strategy of the Mayor of London brings together in one document all the strategies of the Mayor of London, which includes a cultural strategy, a health inequality strategy, a housing strategy, an air quality strategy, and so on and so on and so on. There's a very large number of strategies that by law the Mayor of London has to produce. And the overriding document is the London Plan, which brings them together and refers to them throughout. So when we are responding to changes in the London Plan, then we have to engage with the individual strategies for sure. And we do, and we have assistants from the university, for example, who will analyse for us the health inequality strategy and assist us in workshop discussions so we can see the key components of that strategy. Of course, a number of our groups, because they are interest groups, they are participating in the development of those individual strategies. The environmental side, as I mentioned, is very strong in London. So when it comes to the climate change adaptation strategy or the air quality or noise strategy,